everyone. Welcome to Talk About It Tuesday. I'm Tosca Di Matteo, founder of Tosca Coaching and Consulting, and I'm super grateful and honored to have today's guest, Hillary Blecker of Hillary Blecker Consulting. And for those of you who are new to Talk About It Tuesday, I'll just share briefly why I do this, and then I'll bring Hillary on. Welcome, Lauren. So I do this platform to bring different perspectives, ideas, and experiences to my audiences for your healing, your personal development, and your leadership growth. And today's topic I am really excited about, and my guest I'm even more excited about, Hillary Blecker. So I'm going to bring her on now, and we'll get. Welcome for all of you who are joining. I'm excited. We have a strong start right off the bat, just how it should be. Hi, Hillary.
Hi.
Oh my goodness. Welcome to IG Live. Welcome to Talk About It Tuesday.
Woo!
Happy December. And I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your gifts with the world. I'm really stoked about this topic, and to talk to you for an hour is just like dreamy for me. And I know we're gonna go deep, and we're gonna get into some topics that I'm certainly not an expert in. So I just want to say right off the bat to folks, like, I may make a mistake, I may say something inappropriate, and if I do, please let me know. And that goes
Me
to you,
too.
Hillary, and to everybody else. Yeah. So Hillary and we met in coaching certification training, and I have to say, Hillary, you immediately, stood out as a leader, as someone who was willing to speak her mind, and someone who was vulnerable, and willing to do hard things for the great. I'm humbled to be here with you, and I'm excited for everyone to hear what you have to say. So I do a really bad job at introducing people because you have such a depth of your life experience that brings you to this point. So I'm going to hand it over to you to share what you want to share about your life's journey that kind of helped make you who you are. Whatever you want to share about that.
Wow. Thanks, Tosca. Thanks for having me. It's also a real joy and honor to be with you, to get an hour to talk to you. So thanks for having me. This is I just love that you bring people who you love, care about, want to speak on your platform here, and it's such a gift. It's such a gift. So thank you for making this space. So a little bit about me. I grew up being educated in Jewish institutions my whole life until I went to college, kind of having a pretty well-rounded both Jewish education, extracurricular as well. And I really learned a lot of valuable lessons in terms of taking care of others, really taking care of my people, right? There was a lot of emphasis put on taking care of my people, the Jewish people, being representative of my people, and really learning that there was a collective that I was both responsible for and kind of projecting out to the world. And that was a really solid foundation. And I think it helped me get grounded in understanding and feeling firmly rooted in who I am, right? What my identity as a Jew is, and what my identity in some ways as a human is, because of that experience. And it also, at the same time, taught me kind of who my people were and who I was responsible for, and who I, in some ways, maybe wasn't not only responsible for, but as you kind of put in your framing of today, where I should and shouldn't be, right? So it was
Mm,
very clear to me that kind of I was associated with or connected to my kind of Jewish community, which, at least for me growing up, was almost all white, relatively affluent. And, it was very much kind of this understood thing of, and this I think happens for many, especially like immigrant communities as they arrive in this country. It was, we compared ourselves uh, in a way to, let's say, white Christians, right?
mm,
And what was happening there. And we also made it clear, right, that we weren't black. Like there was
mm,
a real kind of who we were as this kind of grouping and who we weren't and who we associated with and who we weren't. So just like I think most of us in this culture and this white supremacist racist culture, I got messaging about, who to be. So even though there might have been um,
mm,
kind of commentary about, oh wow, that's the way, wasps do things. Ooh, there was also commentary about making sure that like we kind of knew our place, right, in this
mm.
in this hierarchy, in this black white hierarchy that we live in this country.
Mm.
Yeah, and I guess you asked how it got to that was a lot about my childhood,
No, I
right?
love
In
that. I
terms of,
love getting the depth of your experience, and it was just really beautiful what you shared about the environment that you grew up in.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like all things, it's a mixed, nuanced bag of both a lot of love and a lot of also, I'd say protection, but
Mm,
also the ways in which that recreate oppression too, especially considering our whiteness. And I think a way that isn't always seen or viewed
mm.
coming from ethnic. Um, but yeah, so that's some about me, and I think getting into my work life, into professional worlds, I really wanted to always deal with and talk about what wasn't
Mm,
talked about in my experience, which is, more across lines of difference like race and ethnicity and gender, and sexual orientation and religion. Who are we and how do we get here and how do we build trust? And my first kind of professional experiences were in the labor movement. And there was a lot of how do we grow worker solidarity and build movements to make safer workplaces, and a lot of mistrust amongst workers because of varying gender, race, ethnic identities, and the
mm,
fact that, at least in meatpacking plants, most of middle America where I was, the local unions were run by white men, but the majority of the workers were immigrant, Latino, Mexican, and Central American, and um, workers. Yeah.
mm,
So that's through that, I kind of began really wanting to have the dialogue, to do the work of the conversations that weren't being had to build the trust. And I
mm,
slowly made my way to kind of into dialogue work, and into work that for me has been
mm.
about love and liberation, figuring out who we are, figuring out how we connect to others, and how we build authentic relationship.
Wow. Yeah. So, oh my gosh, there's like so many things I want to ask you. But I think the thing that's really popping for me is, right, like as you talked about growing up with in an environment in which um, you were kind of taught about kind of these hierarchies and like who you maybe should or shouldn't talk to, or like who you should or shouldn't be taking care of. And then you kind of go into work that that has to do with such inequities. And I'm curious if there was a point in your life where you started questioning, or you remember starting to question these ideas that were being indoctrinated into you. Like, was there an aha moment, or just experience? Because I think that when we're taught certain things and then we're like, oh wait, is this true? Or like, do I feel this way? You know what I mean? Like, I'm just wondering if you had that kind of pivotal moment. And by the way, Amanda here says, hi, Hillary. I'm hopefully I'm saying it right, but it's spelled Amanda 6001.
Hi. Um, yeah, I mean, there were many pivotal moments. I think one that I'm thinking about was, I think a lot of there was a lot of teaching around charity or tzedakah growing up. And there was a lot of emphasis on kind of giving, right? That we had, and we should be thoughtful and mindful of giving um, to others. And I think some pivotal moments happened for me in really noting and feeling the power difference. So I remember, I remember this feeling of like being, I think maybe it was with my class, um, giving out meals. It was with another class, like in Baltimore, at some point. And it was, predominantly poor and working class Black neighborhood. And it was a bunch of Jewish, almost all white kids kind of doing, food distribution. And the way in which I just remember the whole setup, like how it was being discussed, or like not having food, but this idea of like we were so good because we wwere giving,
Mm,
um, as if in about how they like have real conversations with this in this exchange. And at the time, I couldn't also name power, right? I didn't
mm,
understand or think about how power and money kind of functions. I mean, it's still hard to talk about,
mm,
but I think that really struck me, like I remember that as a moment of, it really struck me of this question of where's like also the humanity of the people that we're talking about, because we're just talking
mm,
about them like
mm,
this kind of group of people, um, as this, which like we're a group of people, they're a group of people, yes, but I think this kind of wondering of like, why am I in this position and they're in that position?
mm,
And like, they're also people and they also get to decide what they want and need. And it's not necessarily mine to decide what to give them or what they should have, right? So I think there
mm,
was some questioning of like, why do I get to decide, just because I am who I am and they are who they are, right?
mm.
And those differences in race and class make it that I get that decision and they don't. So I remember something like that. I remember my first experience abroad where um, kind of thinking to myself and just wondering, and at first it was like a very much um, a kind of fantasy and a like exoticism, right? I think that was my first way of understanding other people that weren't like me, like going abroad and being like, oh, which I think happens to a lot of people with money, like, oh, this family that I stayed with, they didn't have a lot, but they had like the important things. So there was that kind of like first wave. But I think, I was 16 or 17, and it was a way also of questioning and wondering, you know, why is what I have the right thing? So I think it was a way of also some of these openings for me when I was a teenager were more these questions of, I've been imbued with this sense of like rightness.
Mm,
And now these things that I'm experiencing are making me wonder, there's more than one path here, you know? Like the kind of not being exposed to a lot. I mean, lots of people have much greater exposure when they're young people. I think part of for me not having that made me kind of wonder and think like, huh, what are other people's realities? And so for me, I think
Mm.
that was a big part of it, of
Mm.
wondering like, what are other people's realities? And how does that impact their lives? And how do our lives like work with each other's, if that makes sense? So I think those were moments that it just started making me wonder that, and starting to question, why is there a hierarchy of whose matters more and whose feels more important and who gets to decide?
Yeah. I'm wondering, were you able to have conversations about that? Or was it just these seeds planted in your head of just kind of questioning what you had kind of been taught?
I think mostly it was seeds being planted. I think honestly, a lot of it in the beginning when I was a young person was anger.
Mm.
I think it was anger. I think it was anger because I didn't know how to express it. I think it was anger
Mm.
because it didn't seem right. I think it was anger because it felt like there's a lot more happening in the world than I learned, you
Mm.
know, like a very naive, um, this is, there's bigger things. There's
Mm.
a lot out here. So yeah, I think it was hard to discuss. And I think when I discussed it, in some ways it really brings up for me like weaponized wokeness, right? I think there was a way in which it made me feel like, why we're doing all these things wrong, why aren't we doing it? But it's mostly because I had
Mm.
this my own feeling of like, I think shame, guilt, and responsibility
Mm.
of what I was seeing that felt like, ooh, I know that we're connected. I know that I'm
Mm.
here. I mean, not that I could name it then, but that I'm here because you're there, right?
Mm.
So I think there was something about when I did talk about it, I probably just threw anger, especially at my parents, I'm sure. So I think that was so.
They always get the brunt of it, don't they? Oh,
Yeah.
I want to, I just want to like, as you're there, like, what does that mean to you? Like, I'd love to unpack that.
I kind of missed the first part. I don't know if it was my
Oh, the
internet or
internet.
what, but sorry, Pascal.
Yeah, the question was like wanting to unpack what you said about like, I'm here because you're there. Like, what does that statement mean to you when you started to kind of see? I kind of interpreting it as like the interconnectedness of it of life, but I don't know what it meant for you.
Yeah, I think it was about, privilege and consumption and like the ability, both
Mm.
living in the United States and having to access to all these things, being white and having a lot of access,
Mm.
being, having wealth or having access to money, having class privilege, um,
Mm.
but also knowing that there's like, the distribution of things, right? Is
Mm.
the unequal distribution of stuff.
Yes, yes. That is, there's something about that statement that I feel like is so powerful if we walk into rooms and we walk up into situations and just say, I'm here because you're there. Like, yeah, that's, that's pretty deep. Like, yeah, the possibility of where we are because others have suffered because of, it's like the hierarchy, like you were mentioning.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a tricky thing to discuss because also when I'm saying this and it's like, oh, poor me, little rich girl, I have it. But I think it's more about you know, how do we really connect, um, that we are all interconnected, right? And um, there's no ability to disconnect. right? And to not see that
Mm.
what we have and where we are is as a result of, these hierarchies, these oppressive forces and systems, um, that really very much impact our lives.
And very intentionally designed to do exactly what they're doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're working quite well.
Yeah.
They're working as they should.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah, and I definitely like just sharing your awareness and um I think it's quite beautiful and and I'm kind of connecting also to what you said earlier on, which is you talked about that what you do is dialogue work. And I love that framing of it. You talked about love and liberation, and I love putting those things together. I like so talk to me more about like the work that you do around race and equity. By the way, like I'm totally wearing my equality shirt for the cause here. But but like what because the work that you do is around race equity and like what does that mean? Like how do you define that? And like and the fact that we've kind of wrapped this up and titled this, kind of love, relationships, and vulnerability. And how does that link in your mind to race equity work? I'd love to just jump off there and get at it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because it's a central question and it's such a hard question too. It's such a multi-pronged, elusive, maybe it's like an
Yeah.
elusive question. And um, so first I'll say that I think that the work that I do is within this kind of frame of love and liberation. It's particularly around working with other white people. It's not that that's limiting, it's just that that's in some ways everything, right? And I think that we often narrow racial equity to this kind of, especially these days, like this DEI
Mm.
piece, but it's everything. It's right, as so many people have said, um, right? It is the water that we're swimming in. We don't even notice it because we're
Mm.
in it all the time. And what I mean in it, we're in a white supremacist, racist world. So we're in it with at all times, and we can't even see it most of the time. So um yeah, I think for me it's this feeling of all of these pieces of the ways that white supremacy impact our lives, um, also take away our humanity, right?
Mm.
Really impact our humanity, and everyone's, of course. And obviously, right, the impacts of living in a racist society, what it means for Black bodies and violence and killing, right, is very different than what it means for white bodies or other bodies, of color. And I think my focus and working with white people mostly is because I feel like this is our work. This isn't, right, like Black people and brown people and indigenous people and other people of color are living with this all the time. We're living with it all the time too as white people, but we're not really talking about it. And
Mhm.
it's our work to actually be able to hold the charge and the discomfort
Mm.
of confronting our own racism and the interaction between us that creates such discomfort and such
Mm.
inability to hold the charge, like in our bodies when we have these just incredibly unsettled nervous systems. So I feel like a lot of my work is trying to just do that work with other white people between us but from a place of love, not from a place of there's a script
Mm,
that we have to follow, right? Because that's part of our issue, is that we just want the
mm,
answer, right? I work with a lot of, I've worked with and worked with a lot of great, incredibly powerful, intelligent, strong, leaders who are white. And when it comes to race, it's like, just give me the rule book. I want to know what can I
mm,
do, right? I just
right.
and and this like thing is because it's so hard for us, right? And I see this because I know this myself. It's so hard. I don't know how to hold this. I'm scared. I'm scared I'm going to do the wrong thing. I'm scared I'm going to mess up, right? The other thing that comes into play is this good bad binary. If I
Mm,
do it wrong, then that must mean that I'm bad. And then there's
mm,
questioning of our goodness, right? There's all this perfectionism, like, I've learned so much how to use my mind and brain in this culture. Now, if I can't somehow figure it out around race too,
mm,
then I must be a failure, right? So there's all this stuff that we bring as white
mm,
people to the table. So for me, it just feels critical. Um, and I notice it right now, like to take a breath, to how do we figure out how to do this from a place of love?
mm,
Because if we can't figure out how to love ourselves in this, and if we can't figure out how to love each other in this, and I'm saying that as like I'm trying to figure it out. I'm not loving myself all the time. I'm not loving other white people all the time. But if we can't figure out how to do this with each other, then we show up
mm,
just broken,
mm,
when we're trying to do racial equity work, or when we're just trying to do anything, honestly, across race lines, right? With Black and Brown and Indigenous friends and colleagues and beloveds and all of that. So
mm,
yeah, I think the root of it all that we've been missing for so long is just love,
mm.
you know?
In in the work that you do, yeah, it sounds like what I'm hearing is even starting with looking inward and set and like seeing and embracing all your parts. Like, is that where you start? You
I
know,
love it,
like
Jess.
I don't know because
Yes, yes.
right because we see things out in the universe that are like you have to love yourself before you can love another, or like love yourself and then you'll find the one that will, a partner, right? It starts with self-love. And so like, I don't know, that's what I'm kind of hearing you say as the pathway to acceptance of others. But I might be wrong, I might have it wrong. I don't know.
No, it's totally right. And as a fellow coach and as somebody I know, it's a big mission to work on parts work to do better, right? And for those
Mm,
listening, when we're talking about that, what we mean is that just like how communities are made up of lots of different people and lots of different personalities, we all hold an internal community as well. All of these different parts that are within us that are playing really important roles. They're playing, some are protectors, right, for us. Some are, um, like putting out fires, right? Some of them. So we have like all, we have this in total internal community. And I think most people can relate to that, because think about it. You don't just get in arguments and fights with people in your life. You get in arguments with
mm,
yourself, right? It's like,
mm,
what should I do? Well, this part of me is saying this, right? And for many of us, it's like these different voices.
mm,
This voice is saying this other voice is saying this. So yes, we all hold these many, many parts that have been developed over our lifetimes. Many of them are really old. And yeah, it is exactly about how do we identify and get to know our parts so
mm,
that they're more at peace, or at least we can hear them. Maybe it's not even that they're at peace, but that we hear them. And what you're saying, Tosca, about like getting to know your parts feels really true, in terms of white people doing race work and racial equity work, because it's this piece around, I think for many of us, we've been taught to be so ashamed of our bias and specifically our racial bias that we've basically like covered up that part of ourselves, put like a door in front of it with many locks, and we're not even aware of it, right? Because we've been told, since obviously racism is bad, we locked up that room, that part a long time ago and threw out the key. And what happens though is that because we can't even for so many of us really even connect to that part of ourselves, it creates these gaps. It creates these gaps then in other work, because then it means that we're not actually hearing from that part that we need to hear from. And that part, just like all parts, each and every part of us has a very critical and important role to play. And if we don't hear them, they often take over, or they create these gaps of understanding. And so in some ways, part of the work is like try to find that key again to unlock that part that holds our bias, so that we can actually sit with it and come to know it, because we all have it, right? That's what happens when you grow up in a racist society and culture. And how do we actually make it less about ourselves individually and more about a collective responsibility, right? So I think that's also part of why unlocking that part is so critical, because then we can actually be doing some collective work as white people together, as opposed to just sitting in the shame and not and keeping that part hidden, right? As if it's not there and it doesn't exist, and that we clearly can't be or hold any racism within us. So yeah, it is about parts.
Yeah, I'm just like, drop the mic right there. I mean, we could talk for hours, and also I'm like, if people stop right here, like I'm just like that feels shame about the bias that we have because we live in the society that we have, and you cannot like avoid it. And then looking at it to say, it's almost like, because that's having this huge impact on ourselves and others, but it's
Yeah,
like we don't even know it, because we don't know. It's like refusing to look in the mirror to see that you've got a piece of broccoli on your cheek,
exactly.
because we don't want to see
Exactly.
we don't want to know.
Yeah, exactly.
mm,
Exactly. And actually, let's add to that.
mm,
It's deciding to tell every other white person that they have broccoli on their cheek, so that you don't have to deal with the broccoli or whatever the food that's on your cheek.
and you're talking about call out culture, right? Is that the space of that?
I think it's very much connected.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Hmm.
I think it's very much connected. The inability for us as white people to hold this heavy thing that is weighing on us, this this feeling of superiority that we hold, this feeling that we've been somehow or unfairly gifted something, right? It's like, and that we hold this bias. And then I think so much of it is, if I tell you you have it, then I must be clean. I'm okay.
Mm.
Yeah, and it
Because if
doesn't
I can
have to
see it
be.
in you, it means I can see it in me, and I'm willing to look at it in me. But
Well,
that's not
yeah,
really true. But that's not really true, right? And
yeah.
like, unless you really are saying, "Hey, you've got broccoli. By the way, I got some broccoli too, and I'm just like, I know it, and I'm just letting you know." Like,
Yes.
right. So,
Well,
okay.
Tosca, that's what we're trying to do. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. No, keep going.
No, I think that in my mind, that's exactly what I'm hoping to do, in the work that in this work with white people, which is to say, hey, I got broccoli on my face and you got broccoli on your face too. Let's talk about it. Let's
Mm,
talk about why that got there, and let's
mm,
talk about how we hold that, and let's talk about how scary it is, and let's talk
mm,
about what it makes us feel about ourselves, and let's talk about how it impacts our interactions, right? Both with each other, just as white people, even before we bring Black and brown people into the mix. Let's just talk about how that impacts our interaction, and then
mm,
going broader. But unfortunately, I think what we're seeing a lot of instead, you know, yeah, let me point out where you have that broccoli on your face.
mm,
And then that somehow makes it like, if I can point out yours and clearly I'm aware of it, so that means I must not have it. I must not have it.
mm. So something you said earlier, right, was like what was the with these things like weighing down on white people, but I guess that shows up in different ways, and because I feel like there's a lot of people where I'm like, they don't seem to be weighed down by this, or like, do you know what I mean?
Totally.
So, um, yeah, so it's kind of like, how do you get to that level of awareness with those, let's we just say, are suffering from their own self-acceptance and looking at their parts? Like, get, how do you even get at that? Because I'm assuming that when people come to you, your clients, right, there's some awareness of, I gotta work on this, or maybe I was told I need to work on this as a leader, but like, just generally speaking, with the millions of people walking around that don't even know it, that there's this like aspect of self that you've
Yeah.
locked up, you know?
So I can't help but hear your question, Tosca, in the form that I often hear this question, which is, aren't you preaching to the choir a little bit? And I want to make sure that I'm hearing it that way. It's a little bit like, aren't maybe the people who are already doing this work the people who realize that there's maybe an issue? Oh,
Oh, sorry, yeah.
yeah,
Right. So, right. So, and maybe this is it's an impossible question. Like, yeah, because you have you have the people that kind of have some level of self-awareness, and I think that's growing. And then you have no effing idea.
yeah, yeah.
And what's that work?
So,
Maybe that's
so I
not a
want,
fair question. I don't know.
no,
It's
it is a fair question. And the reason why I get asked this question all the time of like,
mm,
aren't you preaching to the choir? And my answer, well, first of all, I will say what my dear and beloved and dear friend who passed a couple years ago, Ched Dorman, would always say. We would always talk about when we got into rooms. That was the question, and the response was, he would always say it as, "We social justice people are the problem." So I want to first start there. I think a lot of times there's this idea that somehow, because we are aware, or for those of us who might be aware of this issue, that like where we really need to go are the people who aren't aware. And I always push back against
mm,
that, because I think about myself. I mean, I'm the problem. This is not it. I don't even need to go. I don't even need to get to, personally, I don't feel that I need to go and work with people who don't feel this way. First of
mm,
all, because you got to you got to be up for it, but also because we have so much that just you know we're dealing with, for those of us who say we care about justice or we care about equity, because we're combating all of our own demons. We're all the parts that we've been talking about, we're dealing with, and we're all the kind of critiques around like a culture of niceness, or even what's Robin DiAngelo's new book called, Nice Racism. I actually haven't read it yet. I've just like heard parts of it. But this idea too that for many of us white people who have some power and have privilege, and right, so we're talking about have some class privilege and power and education and are in leadership roles, we have so much work to do, right? For those of us who are saying we care about this, because we are not able also. And I've been talking about this charge, and I just want to be clear, like Resmaa Menakem, the author of My Grandmother's Hands, who talks about white body supremacy, the somatic piece around how we hold white supremacy in our body. I just am ending a 9-month course with him, and I've learned and am learning so much and deepening my own awareness of what I didn't even notice or hold or understand. And I'm just coming to some beginning and more understanding around really how this all sits in our bodies. But in my work with white leaders who come to me because they want to do this work, and just knowing how I am, right? Like I don't even have to look much farther than myself, but right. And with white leaders who come to me and I get the privilege of working with, it's not as if there's a clear understanding or path. Just because there's a wanting to do doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of work to do, because we're holding generations of, let's say earlier, white violence, maybe even now, right? Things that maybe our ancestors fled from, right? So I could say as a Eastern European Jew, right? There's a lot of trauma that my people fled from, and how that is held in my body and how that responds in this work. There's all this mistrust, and there's all this of ourselves, of how to, all the things that leaders know, right? I work with white leaders who, like, they could tell you how to manage this and this and this, but then when it comes to an issue of race, it is like, I don't know what to do, or I should just trust my Black colleague to do it. And then what happens? That colleague of theirs who's Black fails because they don't get the support, the fear that we don't know what we're doing, and then like it's set up for failure. So I would, my pushback against the question is like, let's not, I'm not ready to even go to that next level or that next person. I'm here with like the me's of the world who need to keep working on being able to hold this hard stuff so that we actually can create and build authentic and real relationships, instead of basically like leaving many of our colleagues who are Black and brown and indigenous on their own because we can't manage or figure out how to work with them, or what we're like leading teams and we can't figure out how to manage racial tension, and so we don't step in, we don't take it on, we don't figure it out because it's too scary. So I think there's a lot of work for us just here to do.
I freaking love this. I love that I asked that question, and because I love the pushing back on what it actually means to ask that question, because also right in the work that people do around, like, and just change makers everywhere, right? There's a lot of people out there that are like fighting for whatever it is, whatever change, and I think sometimes like we don't realize like that if we start with where the people are ready, right? That is what enables us to go further and further with it, versus right, we're just spend a lot of time and energy and get burnt out trying to like have conversations with people that are not there.
There's
Right?
already enough burnout, and let's be clear, there's already enough burnout in this work. You know,
Right.
working just with white leaders is exhausting. It is exhausting in this work, you know,
Yeah.
because another thing I didn't mention, right, is one of the ways that um, one of our places of resistance as white people in doing this work is really also around is deflecting, right? Kind of back to this good bad
Mm,
binary.
mm,
So there's often, in my experience in working with white people, we kind of hold on to something else that we don't like, that is
mm,
also, and it might be very important,
mm,
it might be also not very good, right, that we do have to work on, but use it to kind of resist really working on our racism, really being accountable
mm, mm,
to that part. And sometimes that looks like other marginalized identities. So that could be
mm,
around queerness or being a woman, right? So that might be you know, let's look at how I'm marginalized and oppressed as a woman, right?
mm,
Or let's look at how I've been marginalized as, you know, a queer person. And those become kind of distractions in a way.
mm.
So um,
It's like we want to do every other thing, but
yes,
look at this.
yes, because
Yeah.
it's so hard. And because,
Yeah.
and when I say it's hard because we don't have the tools and the skills.
Right.
There
Right.
are not clear skills. They're not, I mean, they're
Right.
not clear tools. There is no roadmap to doing this work,
Right.
right? So it is very hard and we feel a lot of resistance. I feel so much resistance to this work all the time and I do it every day. And it is a constant work in progress. So that resistance, and sometimes what I was going to say, I got kind of sidetracked by giving examples of that resistance, but that resistance also shows up of discrediting the person who was leading you. So
Mm,
meaning that if I'm leading a group of white people, there's often a lot of, let me critique all the ways you're doing it wrong, Hillary. Let me
ooh.
critique why this isn't working because you didn't do this, you didn't do that, and you didn't do the third thing. You didn't ask us the right question, you didn't build the container right, you didn't give us enough, is a part of the resistance. That is a part of it. And you know, it's
Mm,
what I think, you
mm,
know, it is what many people of color deal with all the time in this workplace, in the workplace, in our world, in our society, of it being, no, you're making the problem, right? Because as white people we can't hold this discomfort,
mm,
right? And so doing this work with white people, that is often the resistance, is the kind of like critique of other. And it's something
mm.
that I think, you know, brown and black and indigenous and other people of color are very used to in our culture, getting that resistance back from white people of like, you made a problem, right? And so that happens in my work, working with white people, of that resistance really showing up a lot. So that's why I say, you know, there's a lot of burnout in this work, just working with the people even who want to do it.
Well, I'm just like the people that do this work should be the highest paid among everybody. And um yeah, like that's oh, how do you even that's a lot. That's a lot to like be doing this work and then to have to fight the resistance from the people you're trying to help. Like oh man, how do you maintain and sustain this?
That's a question I'm asking myself.
Because I mean, you know, this is like the marathon, right? It's like I'm doing corporate culture transformation stuff, right? And I talk a lot about like celebrating like the wins along the way because in this work, right? like like all you're going to have is like small wins for probably the rest of our lifetime, right? We're not flipping everything upside down in the next, 100 years. Like this is deep work. So it has to be done in a way that can be sustained in a way for everybody. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I'm curious, or even maybe how do you advise your clients when it's hard and they're getting at that point of like burnout and frustration, and I don't know if you have any tips. And it's
Well,
okay if not, but
I think you just said some of it. I think you just said some of it,
mm,
which is a lot of it is slowing down and just noticing
mm,
what you're doing. I think I get reminded all the time. A dear friend of mine just the other day when I was, working with on something with her was like, Hillary, um, hello, you know, 400 years of a system built on slavery. What do you think that today is going to just change it, right? So a lot of it is um,
mm,
really, just slowing down and remembering,
mm,
as you said, I don't expect that this is going to change in our lifetime, but neither does that mean that I'm going to not do the work so that next generation it's better. I forget,
mm,
Resma Menachem says how many generations, like if we keep doing the work, how many generations it would take for us to kind of, if we do this work in our body, to kind of move through to get to a place that maybe we can actually,
mm,
be better in it together. I can't
mm.
remember how many.
It's
Um,
probably a number that's just extremely depressing.
yeah, I mean it's a big number, but I think part of what we have to remember, and I think this actually points to part of our individual, which is our like we are not even in the realm of the universe and the world. This is shout out to my friend Carl Moore, who like has really thinks about the smallness of who we are,
Mm,
right? And this is not to say like don't keep doing this work, but I think part of it is we somehow think we are so great and so big, and individually we could make everything like
mm,
different. Like that's not the case. We are this tiny like millisecond in a day
mm,
of the universe, and I think that we have to remember, we have to notice like what can we do and what is possible,
mm.
but also be realistic about that,
Right.
and remember that nothing ever happened because like there's no movement of one. We
Mm,
build collective movements. We build personally and interpersonally, and through that collective, we're able to make change. So I think the answer is that part of it is that we actually have to celebrate what we are doing. We have
mm,
to celebrate the small wins. We have to notice the work that we are doing, right? We have to
mm,
pay attention to that and notice it and remember that just this conversation is the work, right?
mm,
Just us being in it is the work. And that just keep doing it anew every day. And so it's a reminder of things take long times. We are, sitting on the shoulders of our ancestors who did so much to get us here, and so much that we also have to fix, right?
mm,
It's both and. So
mm,
I don't know. I think to me that helps, but I think for me, really, what I've had to build over the past few years are spaces and relationships of love that are both spaces of other white colleagues where I can really do this work, right? Because what we're doing here is the work between white people, you and I in this conversation, and building our muscle to really talk about race. And then also building relationships, you know, across race, and building like loving, real connection. So it's all of it. And it's how do we sit with ourselves and hold even those dirty, ugly parts. So
Yes. Ah, yeah. And I always want to acknowledge too that AJ was saying earlier that the work gets compartmentalized when he's in terms of of organizations and like who should take ownership, and it's like, you know, not it. Oh, that's HR, you know. And so just being aware of even how systems think about these things, I think, is kind of a highlight there. And I know Sarah just joined from the now. Thank you, Sarah, for joining, and everybody else who's come on to talk about. I mean, I feel like we are, and Tatiana here, we were just like scratching the surface of race equity, of how love, relationships, and vulnerability and dialogue and all of our parts play a role in this big conversation. And I guess, and I know we, you know, I'd be mindful of the time. So there's two things I want to ask. So number one, we haven't talked much about vulnerability. I'd love to get your thoughts on the vulnerability piece of this. And the other thing I want to ask is, how can people work with you, get in touch with you, or hear, just you have such wisdom and such beautiful space for this. So I'd love for people to find out how they can keep engaged with you if they so choose.
yeah, it's a big question, and I'll try to give some succinct answer to the vulnerability question, which is in this pressure that we were talking about before, to be perfect, to be good. It really works against our humanity, right? It makes us, even you and I, Tosca, yesterday were talking about this, it makes us kind of flat and one-dimensional.
Mm.
And part of this work is like allowing the nuance in, and also being accountable when we mess up, right? It's both and, right? I'm not saying, right, part of the idea of doing this work with white people is to like build our capacity to do it and to do it better, and specifically so that we're not going to people of color and asking them to take care of us because we're falling apart because we can't deal with our unsettled nervous systems, the charge and the discomfort of being bad because we hold racist thoughts and ideas, right? But so that's part of this idea of doing this work with white people, because, you know, people of color in this country have enough heavy weight of us constantly giving that to them anyway, right? So this is our work as white people. But there's also this idea of like, how do we learn to actually say what we feel? And in that we might mess up, and we might then have to feel bad, and then we have to be accountable for that too, right? And how do we do that and do that well? And it's not just, oh, sorry, I hurt you. I'm so sorry I hurt you. But Ilhan Omar, I think it was her, did this great example, I thought, of like, said something that was called out as anti-Semitic and against, I think it was the Israel lobby. And anyway, and it was like this idea of, you could say, well, I didn't realize that I made like an anti-Jewish trope, right? And I'm learning, and I'm so grateful that somebody let me know, and that I can learn, and that I could work on using that, and not, because that was not my intention, not creating that. So there's like a need to really be accountable, but there's this idea of like, you're not going to be a human. We can't be human if we're just going to be saying what we think is wanting to be here, right? Like I'm sure already in this conversation, there are people who I've hurt or may not hurt, but like there's a centering of whiteness here, right? That might not feel good or useful. And so it's like this idea of how do we let go of some of this pressure to be perfect and to be good and allow ourselves to actually be vulnerable. And in that, I think we come back to our humanity. And I think that's where we can build authentic relationship. So I don't know. It wasn't the quickest answer, but hopefully something to your
No, no,
vulnerability.
I appreciate your willingness to tackle what I know is a big question, but I love the light that you shed on it. Your perspective on that was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank
And
you.
so, gosh, I just want to, okay, we have to do this again. Like, I just, like, if you'd be so willing, as I feel like there's so much ground here, but what do you do? Like, how can people work with you? Do you work one-on-one? Do you work with groups? Like, do you offer resources, newsletters? Like, what's possible for people who are interested?
Yeah, I mostly offer individual one-on-one coaching. I also do group coaching. I also do consulting work with organizations around issues that I would say I've really in the past named as conflict, and a lot of
Mm,
them deal with conflict because of racial divides and difference. Um, and, stuff around organizational development. So, and dialogue work, right? So
mm,
I often work with organizations and groups who want to figure out how to really dialogue around difference and social identity. So yeah, you could find me on my website, hillaryblecker.com. You can email me. It's just hillary@hillaryblecker.com. So yeah, pretty easy to find me.
yes.
And love to hear from those of you who are interested in seeing what there is to do together.
Awesome. Awesome. And so I
Yeah, and
know,
I should name that.
name what?
No, and I should just name that I have a lot of great, wonderful partners too, who I get to work with in this work. So it's not just always me by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank goodness for community doing this together. And so I just want to leave a little bit of space here for anything that you just feel in this moment compelled to share. We covered a lot of things, a lot of ground. And is there any audience that watches live and after the fact to hear from you in this moment?
I think we did it. I think it's just the biggest thing, the biggest growth in me is take a pause, notice what's happening for you in your body, pay attention to it and sit with it and allow that awareness to grow in this
Mm.
work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, yeah, this part of in our body, I just want to talk to you more about that. The somatic piece of all this, of what we're holding, is just like, that's like a whole, I just want to open that box up because that's just, yeah, that's huge. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time, uh,
Thank you.
for
Thank
your
you.
wisdom, your vulnerability, for walking this together with me and sharing your light. I'm blessed that you're in my orbit, and I look forward to whatever will transpire in our work and our friendship. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tosca. Take care.
You
Bye,
too.
everybody.
Bye. Thanks everyone for showing up, and ciao for now.